Good morning. Thank you for joining us today for part one of our new webinar series, How to Accelerate Agile. Today's webinar will focus on ceremonies. My name is Kelly Hamilton, Principal of Marketing at Excion, and I have the pleasure of being your moderator today. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few key items. First, we want to make today's webinar as interactive as possible. So we welcome and encourage your questions throughout the entire webinar. To ask a question, all you need to do is type your question directly into the question window on the webinar panel and hit submit. We'll answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A session following the main presentation. We've also included additional resources for you to check out during the webinar, including some items that are being referenced in today's conversation. To enlarge the presentation area, you can also click on the expand button, and the slide module will expand it both on your mobile phone or desktop. And finally, we're recording today's webinar and we'll post it on the Excion website tomorrow. We'll send you an email once it's live in case you want to watch it again or forward it along to your teams and colleagues. With that, I'd like to introduce you to today's speakers. First, we have Bhavani Krishnan. She's an Agile expert who has over a decade experience with Agile transformations at Fortune 500 and federal organizations. She believes change begins with the heart of the individual and ripples through the collective mindset of the organization. Bhavani surfaces and resolves the fear that underlies change by seeking all perspectives and striving for renewed connection between people in a way that naturally supports adaptive thinking. She's achieved the Certified Agile Leadership credentials through Scrum Alliance. We also have Mason Chaudhry. He's the COO for Excion and an avid evangelist. Mason's led the development of Excion's Agile Adoption Maturity Model, which is designed to help organizations tackle the complexity of adopting, scaling, and improving Agile practices across an enterprise. Mason has over a decade of expertise helping organizations leverage best practices in development, management, and delivery of products and projects. He's also Safe Agile, Lean Six Sigma, and CMMI certified. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to you, Mason.
Thanks, Kelly, and thank you all for joining today. We have an exciting topic to start our series with, and I'm going to go ahead and kick it off describing a couple of figures. In 2018, almost $5 billion was spent by organizations of all sizes across the U.S. to transform their organizations in an agile manner. By 2026, that number is going to inflate to $18 billion. With so many organizations already down the agile path, why is so much money still being spent to become agile? I mean, the reality on the ground is companies of all sizes, nonprofits, federal, Fortune 100, are realizing that business agility is a prerequisite for acceleration in product development, for continuous variations, dealing with continuous variations in the marketplace, better communication inside the enterprise, with other businesses, with their customers. And in all of this, they're finding issues at the tactical, strategic, and executive levels. The tactical levels, they're seeing things with ceremonies and roles and process. The strategic level, they're seeing that their management teams are having a difficult time adjusting to the changes that Agile brings. And even at the executive level, C-suite folks are trying to figure out how do you reformulate your vision and mission to make yourself more agile. We all know that there's a fundamental difference between knowing Agile. Hey, we took a weekend boot camp. We've got someone who's certified, to performing Agile. What's performing Agile? We're a safe shop. We do things using release trains, to actually being Agile. Our vision, mission, our teams, our people, we think in an Agile manner and we act upon it. Where does your organization land is what I ask the folks who've joined today. Are your organizations limited in any way at the tactical, strategic, or executive level? Today we'd like to talk about that. To begin our series, we're going to look at ceremonies. And I'm going to tell you all right off the bat, this is not Agile 101. Instead, we're going to go through some tried and true Agile elements that are a prerequisite in any shop. And with that, we'll start with ceremonies, and the beginning of ceremonies is always sprint planning. And I'm going to turn it over to Bhavani and find out what are the brass tacks of sprint planning.
Thank you, Mason, for having me again. Yes, as Mason said, we all know what sprint planning is conceptually. And for those that are new to this, we have the 101 provided for each ceremony that you can look at to educate yourself. But today, though, I would like to focus on the attributes of an effective planning session. And as you can see, there are some time-tested, expert-approved do's and don'ts for this planning session. To begin with, I would say, don't start the planning without a sprint goal. Tie that goal with the big picture. Give context to teams what they are committing to. And just as it is important to start the sprint planning with a goal, it is also important to close out the meeting with the team's level of confidence towards the commitment. So maybe do a simple fist of 5, and if you don't get their commitment, reduce the scope of the sprint and do it all over again. Or maybe explore the possibilities of swapping some of the sprint candidates. But also make sure that you have the team's capacity so you don't overcommit. The next thing would be prioritization. And, if I have one wish to ask for, then I would always ask for a prioritized backlog. You cannot come to a sprint planning and not have a backlog that is not prioritized. It's like building a house with no doors, right? The next important thing that I would say would be to ask the team members to complete and close out their individual tasks so the stories can be closed. And, if I had a dime every time the team comes to a planning session without closing out their tasks, I can probably afford a Disney cruise by now. So they have to understand how much time you waste when the whole team is sitting there while the Scrum Master clicks on story by story, task by task, making sure that, just the 1 or 2 remaining tasks are moved from in progress to complete so that story can be closed. So please do some homework, and this is what you should be doing anyways. And one more on planning before we move. Estimate as a team, and do not allow stories without acceptance criteria enter the sprint planning at all, at no cost. Having a clear acceptance criteria is one of the first definition of ready that the team should ask for.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, gone from waterfall to agile, understanding estimation and definition of ready is critical. Talk to us about that.
So Mason, definition of ready is the entry criteria for any story to the backlog. Keeping with the house example, the definition of ready for building a house would be the blueprint. And you can imagine without the blueprint, you don't actually know where the doors will go or how many rooms or bathrooms, etc., right? And a simple way to make sure that a story is ready for the team to start working on is to validate that it meets the invest criteria. If the story should be independent, it should not have linked stories because you can't really complete them in a sprint. And the story should be negotiable. When the product owner comes in with the acceptance criteria, thinking what the business wants, there could be some limitations that the team might propose, and in that situation, the team should be able to negotiate. And the next thing is the story should be valuable to the business. And also, the story should, and this is why I mentioned independent, so the team can actually estimate the story. And it's small enough so they can complete that within the sprint, and is also testable. So you validate what the customer was asking for is actually working.
And that's the invest criteria I am a fan of. And when you look at the invest criteria, one area I've seen teams struggle with is the estimation element. Can you run us through some examples?
Sure. The key is not to focus too much on achieving one number or just one median, right? There are multiple ways to estimate. The most popular that I've seen teams use is planning poker. You can use physical cards, or you can use planningpoker.com if your teams are distributed. So there are multiple ways to play this game as well. But the key would be not to get too passionate about estimating. The whole exercise is to promote shared understanding and not to get to, the accuracy about just the numbers, right? So by way of planning poker, you could have a team that ranges anywhere from story point 1 to story point 20. Like, if you have one developer estimate a story at 5 points and another estimating at 13, you need to have a discussion to bridge the gap in understanding. And you will learn that maybe they are, less versus more skilled, and that's common, especially when you have a team that's just forming and, going through the norming situations. And that's okay. There could be differences in understanding the requirement. Maybe one developer is understanding, in one way, and the other developer or the tester is thinking of taking a different approach. And that's okay too. But the key is to facilitate the conversation that will promote knowledge sharing between the team members. And that's how you're going to build cross-functional teams as well. And, once you have the clarity and the consensus, pick an average and move on. Don't spend too much time trying to get too accurate. There's just no value in doing that. So, this is for conversation, estimation. The whole exercise is to promote shared understanding.
And that's great. So what I'm hearing from you so far is sprint planning, that's true Agile. That's where you begin. You look at things such as invest criteria. You try different techniques for estimation. Beyond that, we come to daily stand-up. I'm sure most folks on this call attend a daily stand-up every day. What should we be cognizant of on a daily stand-up?
The one big thing that you need to keep in mind is stand-ups are not status meetings. That's one huge mistake I see over and over, especially when you have new teams kicking off the ground. They think that the stand-up is a status meeting, right? And there are other anti-patterns of daily stand-up, something like core team members, they don't even attend the stand-up. And the meeting goes for more than 15 minutes. And you can't really blame, the Scrum Master for not cutting it at 15 minutes, because if a team member comes in at maybe 5 minutes into the 15-minute stand-up, then you want to be able to give them an opportunity to speak, right? So do not be late and help the team to be on time. The other anti-patterns I've seen is that the team starts the solution before everyone has had a chance to share their updates. They go like, this is what I completed yesterday, and this is what I'm working on, and here's the problem that I want to talk about. But if you run into those situations, wait until the 16th minute for after the stand-up. Other things I've seen, extended members like stakeholders and sponsors, they start to interrupt the meeting with their questions. And it's good that they are curious, but maybe have a parking lot, talk about it at that time. And one big no-no is, sometimes the Scrum board is not even visible to the team during the stand-up, and the burn down is not reviewed on a regular basis.
Yep. And one thing I would say to this, Bhavani, stand-ups I've been to, they become rote, they become methodical. To be honest with you, they get boring. If you were running our stand-up, what would you do?
I will keep it to 15 minutes. That's one thing that I would stress over and over again. And only share the 3 things, right? What you accomplished the day before, what you plan to work on today, and raise any impediments that you see on the way that keeps you from moving towards progress for that day. And anything beyond that needs to be discussed after the stand-up, as I said, move it to the 16th minute. Have a parking lot, board, sticky, whatever it is that you have available to you, but do not discuss or start the solution during your stand-up. And if it goes beyond the 15 minutes, try some techniques like, maybe stand up instead of sitting down. That's why it's called stand-up, right? So you don't get too comfortable and start discussing everything in your areas. Or maybe pass a heavy ball like a bowling ball, so you're not speaking more than a minute or so.
That's pretty heavy.
Yeah, and if that doesn't work, you still like to talk, maybe keep a timer, right? And the other important thing is to review the burn down chart periodically to make sure that the sprint is healthy. Make sure to focus on the progress line against the idea line. If it deviates too much, then, it is an indication of your team's deteriorating health for that sprint. Have necessary conversations to address that. And more important, allow only the core team members to speak during the stand-up and everybody else to listen.
All right. So if this webinar is our sanity check on ceremonies, so far you have reiterated the fact that planning is essential. Conduct really good, informative daily stand-ups. Now let's move on. A lot of POs that I know, product owners, scrum masters, and teams forget the importance of continuous refinement. What do you think of that?
Well, you said a very powerful word, Mason, continuous. That is the key. And, these are some of the little, but very powerful steps that will move the needle in an organization. It is very important to continuously refine the backlog. And I would say maybe even as frequently as twice a week, or at least once a week. And, as teams mature, maybe that will become, as necessary or maybe ad hoc, but continuous is the key. Make sure, the PO comes to the refinement with a ready backlog, meaning that it has an acceptance criteria, priority identified, and ready to provide clarity as needed. And another point I would like to stress on is do not refine the backlog without a PO. The PO is the one liaison for the customer and speaks their voice. If you have a representative that can speak as powerfully as the PO can and has the power to move the backlog items and can decide, then that's fine. But it's not the Scrum Master, it's not the developer, it is not the tester. The PO is accountable for the backlog, and they should run the refinement session for it to be effective. And one other thing, the refinement should not be skipped. Remember, we said the word continuous. Without it, there will be no clarity, there's no estimation, and without estimation, you cannot commit to a sprint planning.
All right, continuous. That is definitely something we should all be focused on, continuous improvement. So, Bhavani, my understanding that if by the end of the sprint, the DOD, the definition of done, is met, then the sprint should be ready for showcase. Is this right?
Absolutely. If the stories on the backlog have met the definition of done, then those are the stories that are considered as complete and ready for review. And I stress on the fact that those are the stories because I've seen a lot of times teams try to get partial credit, meaning if there is a story that has, that's 13 points, and they say, hey, we finished half of the tasks in the story. Can we please get credit, for just maybe 8 points and move the rest to the next sprint? No, you can't because it did not meet the definition of done of testable. You can't test the story if all the tasks are not complete in there.
Gotcha. So I know a lot of folks on the call know what a sprint review is, conduct sprint reviews, but run us through attributes of a successful sprint review.
Sure. 4 items or 4 points that I will give you for successful attributes. 1, product owner reviews committed versus completed items in the backlog. Second, the team demonstrates the working functionality and answers questions. And it's important because this is not a meeting to go over everything that was on your backlog regardless of the business value, right? So this is not an opportunity for every developer to show these are the stories I worked on and every tester to say these are the test cases that we covered. No, this is to show only the working demonstration or only the working software of your backlog. Third, the sprint goal is reviewed to ensure that it was effectively met. And fourth, the team reviews the next set of goals on the roadmap. So if you're able to get to these 4 and check them all, then you've had a very successful sprint review.
All right, so sprint reviews are great. They're required. We all know this, but not to be a Nelly naysayer. Sprint reviews I've seen that my customers talk to me about, there's a lot of low attendance, and they get canceled quite a bit. Why is that?
Mason, if your clients are telling you that they have seen a lot of canceled reviews, then they're right. I mean, I've seen those in my experience as well, and it's pretty sad, right? Because it is an opportunity for the development team to showcase what they have been working hard towards. And if you don't have a sprint review, then, where's the kudos? Who gives you the feedback? How do you know what you're building is the right thing or not? But I can think of a few reasons why, they're being canceled. And, the very reasons that I just, mentioned a few minutes ago, you probably don't have the right stakeholders to generate interest. Remember I said that, include the right people and only show the working software, right? So if you are talking about everything in your backlog, you're probably boring everybody in the audience. And if an item is not demonstrable to the customer, don't review it. That's not the opportunity. You probably have, you probably can't schedule other meetings to show the product owner or maybe, get some kudos from everybody in your team. Do that separately. Just don't do it in the sprint review with your, stakeholders, sponsors, customers, and users being in the audience. Keep it to the point. Be prepared. I've seen unprepared teams come to the review and scramble to demo. And I've also seen on the other end of the spectrum, teams trying to run multiple dry runs that it becomes a waste of valuable time, right? So find the balance. Make sure your demo environment is ready and the person presenting has access to it. If you want to do one dry run, go for that, but not too elaborate, right? And also, if the audience is large, make sure that your audiovisual needs are ready. Have an effective facilitator control the meeting. This is one meeting where you can showcase and seek feedback.
You know what? One thing I'm hearing from you really well right now is a lot of folks complain that they overestimate and underdeliver. The things that you've described so far, from planning to reviewing, if folks follow through, have the proper facilitation, and stick to the correct scope, they would do better at estimation and at delivering. Mm-hmm. So with that said, say the teams that we're talking about do get the feedback from stakeholders and customers. What's next?
The next is my favorite in the series of ceremonies, Mason. And it's one of the most powerful ceremonies, yet ironically, it also gets very little attention, and that's retrospective.
Hating on the retrospective.
Not hating, loving, but I'm sad that it doesn't get the attention that it requires.
I'm with you. I've worked with large organizations with savvy Agile shops, and I've worked with newbies to Agile, and the retrospective always gets, I don't say it gets pushed to the back, but hey, if we have time, we'll do a retrospective is what you hear. Yeah. Why is that?
Well, similar to sprint reviews, Mason, common reasons are failure to empower and engage and follow through. If you don't have engagement and follow through, then nobody wants to attend that.
But who? I guess a common question that arises is who should empower the teams?
It's not a straightforward black and white type of question, right? I would say it's not one person or one entity that would empower the teams. Granted, the leadership should empower, but then the team should also take the opportunity. So I would say everybody has a role in it. The team has to be open and transparent. They have to believe in change and in providing the feedback and trust that the management will address their concerns. And on the other side, the leaders will have to take that feedback and follow through to build trust. I've been in organizations where retros have become or have been customary, and the feedback does not even get to the leaders. They're just meaningless notes somewhere that doesn't even get any traction, and it's just a scrum master running through these retros asking what went well, what did not go well, what can you improve, and it just becomes so mundane that everybody kind of loses focus.
Yeah, you know what, in listening to you and my own experience, that disconnect you mentioned about just checking a box or filing away information, I don't blame these teams on giving up on retros, but they shouldn't. How can we improve this situation?
If you want to see improvement, have regular retros. And, I mentioned that there are teams that just keep asking about the same thing, what went well, what did not go well, and keep it mundane. Don't give up. Keep doing it. And not just for the teams, but for the programs as well. And when I say keep doing it, I want to just, focus on that a little bit before I move on to the programs. Keep them, every iteration, definitely, at the end of the iteration. Schedule it for maybe, an hour, not any less than 30 minutes, but maybe, play some games. Change the environment, change the atmosphere. Maybe, if the weather is good, take it outside, play some games. And it's in the hands of the facilitator to make it better and make it worthwhile. So going back to the program, I would suggest maybe every quarter, gather the whole program and talk about what can be improved and identify actionable steps with owners. That's the key, right? Follow through. Visit them periodically and maybe even monitor the progress and share that with the team so they know that their feedback is being addressed and it's getting done.
It's interesting you say that. Most teams, most organizations, they're down in the trenches, they're working hard, and when the retrospective comes, what I'm hearing from you is think out of the box, make it interesting, not a blame game. Go out and look for actionable information from your lessons learned. If that's the case, can you run us through a couple of ideas that you like in retrospectives?
Sure. There are many. One of the effective ones is the problem-solving workshop. And the slide that we have up there is from the Scaled Agile Framework website. And they kind of explain it very nicely, and I've used that many times where, if you are, it doesn't even have to be a program retro. It could be just a team retro, but agree on one problem to solve. Whether you are actually taking a, list from the team members throughout the sprint, or you're just, talking about maybe you just come to the retro and you put that on the list on the wall saying, these are some of the high-level ideas that we want to talk about. Maybe you can dot vote on them and prioritize and pick one problem to solve, right? So in the example here, it says insufficiently reliable release commitments. So you see that they're taking that, and the next step to that is to apply the root cause analysis of 5 whys. And once you get, to the 5 whys, then you want to be able to prioritize and say, which of the 5 whys is, the biggest problem that we want to talk about. So you're basically narrowing it down to the bottom of the 5 whys. And from there, you want to brainstorm solutions for, whatever is next or whatever is the highest on your list. And once you have been able to brainstorm, add those to your backlog, right? Because, again, as we mentioned, you want to be able to go back and look at those, address those, and see the progress and report on those. So that's one way.
That's a problem-solving workshop. I know there's some cool models out there, some organizations around the globe that will give you for free what they do. Can you talk to us about that?
Sure. One of the popular models that I've recommended or used is the Spotify model, and they call the Squat Health Check. We've actually added a link in our resource section to their material, and you can download that from their website. And it's free, it's effective, it's easy to follow. The other methods that I have used are, like Futurespect, maybe play some games, etc.
What's Futurespect?
So Futurespect is in which it's actually a problem-solving type of exercise. So retrospect is reflecting on what went well or what has happened, right? It's lessons learned. Futurespect is the opposite. This is in which teams envision itself in the future and walks back in time to identify steps that will require to get to ideal state. I remember when I was coaching at a financial organization, I experimented with the concept of Futurespect. We actually invited the whole program, including the leadership, and we asked them to envision a perfect island. We kind of drew on the wall with palm tree, and you probably have like boats and blue water and whatnot. Envision one that would be perfect. We then asked the teams to list out all things that would make the island perfect. And the teams had listed out things like dedicated resource and, start with the vision or purpose of the team when they're being stood up. They were asking, or they were listing items like required trainings and tools and infrastructure and all of that. And it was really eye-opening for the leadership.
And that's great. And you know what? The beauty of Agile is it's iterative. It changes. And what I've heard from you today so far is that there are opportunities to shake things up, even at the most mundane level. Your daily stand-up, like you mentioned earlier. Not forgetting things such as the refinement, not forgetting things such as your planning sessions, having the right people in the room, all the things that you mentioned, making it fun. With that said, is there an example you'd like to share with us before we move on? I mean, is there any specific outcomes that you've seen?
Sure. So going back to the same example that I was sharing with you, Mason, the future spec with the entire program, I said that it was eye-opening for the leadership, and in a way that for the first time the leadership understood how broken the process was and how deeply they were dependent on this SME knowledge for legacy applications. And I say for the first time because they knew the problem existed on the surface, but they just hadn't realized how huge the problem was, in that it was impacting their productivity by 60%. And I say 60%. And, when we collected the data, we were all so surprised. And when we got into the depth of the discussion, it was uncovered that their SME engineers were sucked into resolving production or environment-related issues, 60% of their capacity.
Wow.
Yeah. And, not to mention that they had other responsibilities like SME analysis or helping with the solution architects or, talking to the bankers that were on the field to help enhance their user experience and what could the system handle versus not, right? So the problem became areas of opportunities in the program backlog. We actually introduced something called office hours for the senior leadership team to discuss and address these high-impact issues. The session was so powerful that this became the most attended event every quarter at the program level. And, the team members were flown from other locations nationwide, and management saw the power of engagement, and they actually extended this to a 2-day offsite event. I remember they also added roadshow type of activities following, this program retro to include quarterly roadmap and forecasting as well. So, the management actually jumped on the opportunity and made it so overwhelmingly positive that, I keep hearing even today from, my connections there that it's so powerful and they made so much improvement.
Yeah, and that makes sense because one of the first things you mentioned in today's webinar is sometimes there's a disconnect of information flow from teams that are operating on the ground to information that flows between middle management all the way to the executives. Mm-hmm. And the more transparency, as you're saying, you can achieve, the better the outcome.
Absolutely, absolutely. You got it.
Well, it took a while, but thank you, Bhavani. I will mention that this is the first in our series of webinars, and with that, we've talked about basic building blocks. And to some folks, you might be saying, hey, we do get our planning well. We do our planning right. Our stand-ups are good. We all have room for improvement, and in Agile methodology, no matter if you're agnostic, you follow Scrum, you follow Kanban, you're a safe shop, whatever it may be, going back, doing a sanity check on your basics, on your ceremonies, your roles, your process, only fine-tunes your output. And with that said, I'd like to talk about our next topic. Today we did a lot of do's and don'ts. When it comes to culture and mindset, That's not the right syntax. It's not about do's and don'ts when it comes to culture and mindset. I'm very excited to talk about culture and mindset with Bhavani next time because that is her area of expertise. And so even if today you might have thought, hey, we are good at our ceremonies, culture we all can fix. And Bhavani, you want to give a little taste of what's coming next?
Absolutely. As you said, that's, I don't know if it is my one area of expertise or not, but it's definitely my favorite. And it's, culture and mindset is such a huge topic, and it's a very important topic because that touches upon, the multiple layers of the organization, whether it is the team or your program, your portfolio, or enterprise. It's just cross-cutting. So, I will definitely encourage all of you to come join us because we're going to be getting to the bottom of, what are some of the things that we should expect in an organization that is really, really serious about the Agile transformation. I won't give all away, but, definitely join us. I'm excited about it.
Fantastic. Well, Kelly, back to you.
Well, great. Thank you both. So we've had quite a few questions come in, and it's not too late. If you have a question, enter it in the question box, and we will get to all of those. So let's just jump in. So the first one I've received says, we have distributed teams in 3 different time zones and 2 countries. How do we conduct effective ceremonies?
Great. It's, it's a common question and a common problem that I run into, as Agile is being implemented globally today. Effective tools is very important, especially when you have multiple teams in multiple, time zones in multiple countries. I'll give you an example. When I was at a major advertising company, we had teams in Bangalore, in Dryac, and in Baltimore, and I believe also somewhere in Europe. So for stand-ups, it was, not that big of a deal because, we kind of found a time zone that worked kind of for everybody, and that was, I think close to 11 o'clock midday. But when it came to, your planning sessions and your refinement sessions and also your retro, even within one team, if your team is not, made up in a way where you are clear-cutting, you have a team in North America and you have a team in, India, and you have a team in a different time zone, but you have multiple team members just based in one team, but, spread across the different time zones, it becomes challenging. So what we did was, for those ceremonies, we kind of worked with them ahead of time. If it was the planning session, we kind of did some pre-planning activities, maybe with just, the few team members that were in the different time zones. And then when they came together, maybe just one representative joined the bigger planning session. And the same for the refinement as well. We had a concept of Scrum, where if the team members were cut across different time zones, then, maybe one team will have their, Scrum at 11 o'clock. And then at the end of the day, however it worked for them, there was one representative that brought in the information or the challenges or even the updates from the Scrum, and then they discussed that during the Scrum of Scrum. So there are multiple ways, multiple, tools that you could use that, maybe like HipChat or Skype. You make use of those tools and, maybe video chats. So multiple ways, but, these are the high level that comes to my mind.
Okay, great. I hope that answers your question. The next one we have is showcase the same as demo.
Demo could be as simple as, you're just demonstrating and you're just, showing the working software to the product owner. But showcase is, in other words, team or sprint review. Sprint review has multiple things, as we mentioned, right? So in there, you want to be able to look at what was committed versus what was completed, show the percentage of the completed velocity, and go over, if there was just 10% that you could not meet, then talk about why you were not able to complete those. Maybe there are challenges that you need help from, either the stakeholder sponsors or even your management team. And your review will also include a look into what's upcoming into the next sprint, so you get the go no go from your either your portfolio or your enterprise or even your sponsors. So review is a little bit more comprehensive than just a demo.
Great. So the next one is refinement the same as grooming?
Yes, it is very much. And there are, other words that you can use. Some organizations I've seen, they use words like elaboration sessions. So you're basically just, elaborating on one requirement, and you're trying to understand whether you have developers, architects, testers, and, maybe some customer representative in there. So grooming is just another word for backlog refinement.
Great, and thank you for all these questions. If you have more, keep sending them in. So the next one is, how can I assess the current state of my team ceremonies?
There are many assessment models. We at Excion, use a proprietary Agile assessment maturity model. It's comprehensive yet simple to assess the best practices, including the do's and don'ts. And if you don't have access to any tool, you can probably use our do's and don'ts that we have provided here. But the key is to identify the areas of improvement to assess, your current state of ceremony. So, if you have a Scrum Master that behaves like a project manager and then says, hey, person A, give me an update on, this, and this. So, then your ceremony for stand-up, your stand-up is not working at that point. And it doesn't have to be only the Scrum Master that works on identifying the areas of improvement. As a team member, you have every bit of responsibility to identify where you are, how well your ceremonies are. So, keep an eye for those things.
Thanks, Bhavani. The next question we have is, what stories would you not review in the sprint review?
As I said before, this is not an opportunity for the team members to go over every single story, right? So if a story does not add value to your business, then do not review. So as an example, there could be an enabler story like, and it may not even have a story point associated in there. It could be a proof of concept. So, you don't have to review that in the review session or even in the demo and say, in order for me to achieve this POC or the proof of concept, I went and I talked to, the product owner, or I went to, create this small, functionality with the developer, and then we tested this. So if it doesn't add value to your business, at a high level or even to your feature, then that's, not time well spent at that point. So review the working functionality, anything that is testable and shows value. So let's say, your customer, as an example, asks for a blue button, right? Then if you are able to show that, on the landing page, on the left navigation tab, there is a blue button. If you can show that, if that's a working functionality, then those are the type of the stories that you want to add in the review, because that excites the customer, that, makes the customer, understand or reiterates and reassures that the money that they're spending towards is being worked on properly, and they get more excited about those things.
Great. Okay, so our last question is, Bhavani, can you define dry run?
It can mean different things to different organizations, but what I mentioned about dry run, what I meant was just a practice, practice demo, or, if you have team that has multiple stakeholders, or if you are, part of a safe organization, and if you have multiple teams touching on, different integration environments, like, or if you have multiple applications that has to be integrated, it is always good to practice those ahead of time, just to make sure that, during the integration testing or system test, you're not, breaking anything. So when you are actually reviewing it in front of the stakeholders and the sponsors, you're not, trying to resolve issues that are arising from, those type of challenges at that point. So by dry run, I meant practice.
Okay, great. Well, I hope that answered everyone's questions. If you have any additional questions, or your team does if you share the video recording with them, please feel free to email us. We're happy to get answers to you and kind of clarify anything you might need. So Mason, Bhavani, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
And everyone on the call, I hope this was really beneficial. As I mentioned, I will send out the video recording tomorrow so that you've got this. You can watch it again at any time if it's helpful. Share it with your teams or colleagues. And I'll also include information on our next webinar. We hope you'll join us on November 7th as we talk about culture and mindset. Have a great day.